The movie begins with Jessica, a recently widowed young woman packing her belongings into a U-Haul trailer. Leaving the city to begin a new life in the wilderness, she has no idea of the horrors that await her on her journey ahead. Once packed, Jessica sets off in her car, towing her possessions in the trailer behind. She soon reaches a vast forest landscape where she drives along the winding roads, preoccupied by the sadness of losing her husband. As she continues, she reaches a black Jeep driving quite slowly ahead. Jess tries to overtake a few times, which proves difficult, but then she eventually manages to. Strangely, the Jeep then overtakes her, causing Jess to have a near miss with an oncoming truck, leaving her shaken up. With no one else around, the Jeep then speeds up behind Jess and tailgates her. Panicking, she pulls over and tries to catch her breath as the Jeep drives off. With it now dark and 300 miles from home, Jessica stops for gas. Whilst on the phone to her dad, the Jeep pulls up in the car park across from her. Jessica turns as the Jeep slowly drives closer, then away. Later that night, Jessica lies on her bed in a motel room and looks out the window tensely. She scrolls through photos of her with her husband and cries, heartbroken. She lies awake at night looking out of the window, momentarily shaken when she thinks the Jeep is driving by, but it turns out to just be someone else. The following morning, as Jess is about to leave, a man knocks on her car window, making her jump. Calm and friendly, yet still giving off instant serial killer vibes, he apologizes for yesterday, claiming that he didn't see her trying to pass but was in a hurry, so he had to overtake her. Doubting him and cautious, Jess tells him it's okay, but she has to go. In an attempt to keep her there longer, the man asks her name and where she's going. Jess says that she's heading north, and the man replies that he's always in the area, before apologizing again and wishing her a good trip. Jess continues tensely on her journey into the middle of nowhere, and it's not long before she runs into him again. She finds him pulled over in the road, looking under the hood. Jess exhales, locks the door and stares at him, weighing up how to handle this. He now appears to have a broken arm, but it's just a ploy. The man knocks on the passenger window and tells Jess that his engine failed. Jess offers to call him a tow truck, but he pushes for a ride to the gas station. Jess is very reluctant and tries to get out of it by saying she will drive to the gas station and tell them to come to him. Not accepting this, he asks her to help him tow the car out of the road, but Jess apologizes and makes a swift getaway. It's now nighttime, and still shaken up and nervous, Jess gets out at a rest stop to have a cigarette. She calls her mom, who expresses her concerns about Jess's mental state as a result of recent events. Then, sure enough, the Jeep pulls into the parking lot. Jess stares, worried, tells her mom that she has to go and walks back to her car, starting to pant. As she fumbles to start the engine, the man approaches and tries to talk to her, but Jess drives off, panicking. Once on the road, desperate to get away, a white truck pulls out and blocks Jess. She beeps at him frantically, but he has engine trouble so won't move. Just then, the man appears and angrily bangs on the window, asking Jess what her problem is. Jess manages to drive off, but she is unable to drive quickly, as there is a pickup truck in front. She calls 911 and tells them she thinks she's being followed, but there's a bad connection, and she is unable to explain her location. Now really panicking, Jess's car starts to veer off the road and falls into a side ditch. She gets out and finds one of the U-Haul tires has been slashed. Just then, she sees the Jeep approaching. So, terrified, she detaches the car from the trailer to try to get away. There's not enough time, however, and the man smashes her window with a wrench, climbs in, and attacks her as she struggles. He then injects her with something and strokes her face, creepily. The next morning, Jess wakes up, disorientated, barefoot with a bloodied lip on the floor of an underground room, somewhere in the forest. She gets up, breathing heavily, and limps to a small window with bars across it to figure out her whereabouts. She hears stomping upstairs, then sees a wheelbarrow and someone's feet go past the window. Jess calls for help, but it is the man. He kneels down to the window, stares intimidatingly and shushes her, then walks off. At nighttime, the man enters the room where he is holding Jess captive. Terrified, she cowers in the corner. He walks over slowly with a flashlight, smiling smugly. Jess offers him money and begs to be let go, promising not to tell anyone, but the man implies he's captured many women before and tells her to take off her clothes. Jess tries to distract him and makes a run for the door, but he kicks her, knocking her to the floor and locking them in. He leans over her, holds her wrists and strokes her hair, telling her it's okay, as he watches a video on Jess's iPad of her and her husband together happily. He then forces distraught Jess to tell him how she lost her husband who committed the unthinkable 6 months ago. Now sobbing, the man pushes for more details before leaving her alone, locked in. When day breaks, Jess spots a sharp nail sticking out of a wooden pole and cleverly manages to use it to unlock the door. She tiptoes upstairs to find herself in a forest cabin and hears the man using machinery outside. As he walks to enter the cabin, she quickly hides in a cupboard next to the front door. In a tense, drawn-out scene, the man puts away groceries and swigs liquor from a bottle, as Jess desperately tries not to make a sound. He then sits at a table and cuts slices of cheese with a sharp knife, as Jess continues to attempt to be silent. The man then receives a call from his wife, Catherine, who he lies to about being away on a business deal, and then speaks to his young daughter, Mina, telling her he'll see her in a couple of days. Once done, he puts the knife in pocket and heads downstairs. With this, her brief chance to escape, Jess makes a run for it and sprints frantically through the forest. The man soon realizes she is gone and runs after her. Hindered by having no shoes, Jess cuts her foot badly on a sharp root and falls. She screams when she pulls the root out and the man hears. She continues running and reaches a load of boulders, with no trees to hide behind. She turns to see a roaring river. With the man coming down behind her, she has no choice but to jump in. He watches as she's carried violently downstream away from him, eventually clings to a rock on the bank to catch her breath. Jess continues to stumble through the forest, on edge, suffering in pain with her foot. Not sure of which way to go, she leans against a tree and senses someone coming her way. Seeing a rifle appear alongside her, she leaps out and hits another man with her stick. He aims his gun at her and orders her to get down on knees. He turns out to be a caring hunter named Robert. Jess asks Robert for help and tells him they have to get out of there as someone is trying to kill her. Having smashed Robert's phone when she hit him, they can't call for help, but Robert takes Jess to his car, gives her a spare pair of boots, and they leave. As they drive down the narrow forest track, Jess is on edge. She looks at her injured face in the mirror, and Robert offers her sandwiches and water, which she gratefully accepts. Robert tries to reassure Jess, telling her he thinks the man is long gone, but shortly afterwards, they reach an obstacle, a fallen tree blocking the track. Jess immediately starts to panic and tells Robert that the man did it and must be nearby. Robert tries to calm her and they attempt to lift the tree trunk, but it's too heavy. Just then, the Jeep approaches. Robert gets his gun. In a calculated act of manipulation, the stalker pretends to be on a call to the police, telling them he's found her and sorry for bothering them with this again. Acting calm and relieved, he apologizes to Robert and explains that Jess is his sister. She's not well and is having another episode. In initial disbelief, Robert retorts that Jess told him that he tried to kidnap her. The man starts to walk towards fearful Robert and Jess, explaining that Jess is behaving this way due to a recent family tragedy, her husband committing the unthinkable, and she assures him that she is seeing a doctor weekly. Outraged, Jess insults him and tells Robert that the man is crazy and will try to kill him too. Maintaining his act, the man asks Robert to help get Jess into his car, but Robert aims his gun and looks on, frozen, as the man restrains Jess, gently telling her it's gonna be okay. Jess hits the man in the eye and runs. The man, now injured, asks Robert to grab Jess, but he insists on calling the police. The man pretends to give his phone to Robert then, to Jess's dismay, attacks him, punching him to death before shooting him with the rifle. Jess manages to escape and continues struggling to limp through the forest as heavy rain pounds down. She takes shelter at the side of the boulders and sees the light from the man's flashlight edging closer. Terrified, she hardly breathes. After some time, the man seems to have passed, so Jess steps out, but he shoots her in the shoulder from a distance. Jess falls, then forces herself up, whimpering in pain. The man loses sight of her, and she continues to limp on as he searches behind her. With him now just a few meters away, Jess crawls through plants, keeping low, then hides in one. As thunder rumbles, the man gives a tormenting speech to try to taunt Jess into coming out to fight, referring to her husband as a coward who is rotting in a grave somewhere. Throughout the onslaught of his cruel words, Jess manages to keep composure and resist coming out to fight. Now really agitated, the man tells her that she's delicious and he's coming for her. He picks up his gun and looks around, but Jess escapes once more and limps, recoiling in pain to a tree, where exhausted, she falls asleep. The next morning, Jess wakes and realizes she's still alive. She gets up and continues to hobble through tall trees, passing over the boulders again. Suddenly, she hears an engine, and the Jeep goes past and parks. Jess hides behind a tree as the man gets out with Robert's gun. He lifts Robert's body out of the trunk and drags him away to be buried. Jess waits, weighing up her options. Eventually, she shuffles cautiously towards the Jeep as the man starts to cover Robert's body with soil. Jess sneaks around the side of the Jeep, watching the man through the window, and gets in without making a sound. You could cut the tension with a knife as the man continues to dig, and Jess searches for his phone. As she finds it, the man returns, so she climbs over and lies in the trunk in the nick of time. The intensity mounts when the man hears a creak in the back, but luckily, he starts the car and begins to drive. Jess clings to a wrench and calls 911. She attempts to whisper, "Help me," and explains that there's a man in glasses trying to kill her, but the operator can't hear. Desperately, she repeats, "Trace this call, trace this call." The man then stops the car and looks in the wing mirror. Suddenly, Jess takes her chance and attacks him violently with the wrench. The man zooms off and fights back, trying to stab her several times. She strikes his arm with the wrench, causing him to drop the knife, then holds the wrench to his throat, but he slams the pedal, making her fall back. Not giving up, Jess then grabs the knife and stabs him in the arm, causing the Jeep to swerve, spin upside down, and skid down the track. After some time, Jess opens the door and releases herself from the vehicle. Covered in glass and exhausted, she lies in the mud, looks up at the trees, and sees a helicopter overhead. She reaches for the wrench, crawls, and finally stands. Shortly after, the man opens the door. Jess manages to limp towards a clearing where trees have recently been burnt. There's no one there. As the man approaches, Jess calls his man's wife and asks her whether she knows where her husband is right now. With Catherine believing he is in California on a business trip, Jess breaks the news that he is not, and is in fact a kidnapper and murderer. We finally learn that his name is Sam, and when he arrives, Jess tells him he has a phone call. Sam stands frozen as Catherine calls out, "What the hell is going on?" Jess announces her name, and that if this is the last time Catherine hears from her, it's because her husband killed her, just like he killed a man named Robert. Jess then throws the phone on the ground towards Sam and tells him to talk to his wife. Sam stares, debating, then ends the call. The movie concludes with an epic fight scene in the mud. Sam goes for Jess with the knife, but falls, enabling Jess to pin him down. But he strangles her and pulls her to the ground and punches her in the face. Jess manages to kick him away and attacks him again and again with the wrench. Sam attempts to kill her with the knife, but she bites him and stabs him. She then lies down exhausted and stares into his eyes as he dies. Traumatized but relieved, with her face entirely covered in blood and mud, she rolls over to look up at the helicopter, awaiting her rescue.